Hey everybody, welcome back to the Magnetic Podcast. Really excited today to have on Tyler Denk from beehiiv. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us. I know I'm super excited. We actually use beehiiv here at Nifty Bridge, so get to meet the man behind the mission over there. So thank you so much, Tyler, for coming on. Would love to get just a brief background on yourself and how you got here today.
Yeah, for sure. Very broad question to start off as like a brief background, but I'll start off by previously went to University of Maryland, studied mechanical engineering, self-taught software developer there. I built a company with two of my friends, college project, to kind of connect entrepreneurs and startups to different software developers on college campuses. Needless to say, it wasn't like a massive billion-dollar business, but taught me a lot about entrepreneurship, how to build things, how to really be scrappy and build a company, build an audience from really not having any money, bootstrap, broke college kids. After that experience, I had an opportunity to join Morning Brew very early as a second employee, kind of doing a little bit from leading growth, product, and engineering. So join Morning Brew. I'm sure we'll get into that at some point, but incredible ride. That was 3.5 years up until they got acquired by Business Insider in 2020. Left, joined Google briefly on the YouTube music team for a bit. And then after kind of building beehiiv on the side while at Google, eventually took the leap to start beehiiv full time with my two co-founders, which is what I've been doing for the past 2 years.
That's awesome. That's a great summary. I know that was an incredibly broad question, but we appreciate that. First off, let me start by Maryland guy. That's great. I went to Loyola, so I didn't know
Nice.
that. How did you end up at Maryland?
Yeah, so I kind of didn't have a ton of direction in high school of what I wanted to do. When I was a junior, I started like this physics class with like a legendary professor at my high school who basically was a funnel from taking physics to AP physics to pushing people into the engineering program at Maryland. And for whatever reason, I just fell in love with physics and solving very difficult problems. And the guy was an absolute legend. And so that's what first opened my eyes to what engineering was. And then from that experience and kind of really finding my space and like the problem solving kind of like mindset of like science, physics, engineering, math, he kind of pushed most of his students to the engineering school at Maryland, which is what led me to doing mechanical engineering there.
And do you miss Maryland ever? Like the state of Maryland, or are you kind of glad you're out of there?
I mean, I have no regrets of my childhood, my upbringing, the sports, the school, the people that I've met there. My family still lives there, so I'll be there in a few months actually to visit. But right now in Medellin, Colombia, usually reside in Los Angeles, California. So if that speaks to how much I miss Maryland, maybe that's the answer.
Medellin. So I actually was there. I want to say like 4 months ago. I was staying in Poblado. Are you near Are you near there, Poblado?
Yeah. I'm staying in Poblado for 5 months now. But yeah, Medellin's beautiful. The country is amazing. There's like a huge crew of entrepreneurs, startup people, mostly like agency type
Hmm.
that all reside here. I think take advantage of getting paid US salary, living in a Latin American country that's a typical cheaper cost of living, but amazing expat squad here for sure.
So on that note, before we jump into some of the background, actually very curious, what is your thoughts on Medellin for someone that's been there for, it sounds like almost 4 months.
Yeah, so this is the third time I've been here. So if that speaks to how I feel about it, it's one of my favorite places in the world. There's I think the people here are incredibly nice. I think the food's great, the culture is like super rich. And then having like a very tight-knit expat entrepreneurship focused community is like very helpful here. It's also a lot of the people that you meet here have like intentionally chosen to go out of their way and move and do something different. So I think something that I take a decent amount of pride in is I think so many people follow the traditional path of grew up in one area, go to college in that area, find a job in that area, settle down, and just kind of repeat the traditional like ladder path of their career in life. And with remote work and like the silver lining of COVID, it really kind of opened the door to be able to work wherever. And I've taken full advantage of that as a single guy who doesn't have a ton of ties to be in any individual location. So being able to build a business, as long as I have a gym to go to and an office to work from, I'm pretty flexible and allows me to travel a decent bit.
Yes, that's something that I think a lot of people hear and they really like want to do similar things, travel, move around. What's sort of that thing that kind of prompted that? Has that always been something with your background where you've always been like, hey, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna, go to Medi and I have no idea what's out there. Like, is that something that you were born with? Is that something that you had to kind of learn?
Yeah, I'd say I think it relates a lot to like entrepreneurship as well, but like complacency is like the thing I am scared of the most. And I think that works for you in a lot of cases. So for startups and entrepreneurship, like there's always something I could be doing better, or the company could be doing better, a feature could be better. And like that lack of complacency and how I view the world in that way is like a huge motivating factor to continuously optimize and look for better solutions. You could say it backfires in other things. Like I don't like to find myself getting complacent in a routine or a location or typically relationships. But like anything across the spectrum, I think there's something to be said about. I live right now, I'm 29. I get to run a remote company. I don't have a family. I don't have ties that I need to be in any given location. And I know that's not an experience that will last forever. And like that's set to change at some point in my life. And so I really do try to live through the lens of I want to do things now that I know I can do now and not regret not doing them in the future. So that's kind of what led me to, I lived in Mexico City for a month last year, which kind of opened my eyes to just living in a different country and working remote from there, and had an incredible time in Mexico City. Parlayed that into Medellin earlier this year and then back again now for 4 months.
How has that, like that amount of travel? Because a lot of people that I talk to, they haven't done those things. How has that helped you, or I guess how has that impacted you as sort of a co-founder of, not only Morning Brew? I know this is more recent, but with beehiiv.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it has helped in any manner outside of, it's like for my life and happiness in general, it's definitely helped in those areas. I'd say I mean, I'm definitely not someone who's traveling, living out of a van, like pulling up into a random coffee shop with the headphones and putting in 8 hours of work. That there's definitely a level of anxiety of whenever I go to a new location, there has to be a gym, there has to be a workspace with good Wi-Fi where I can like plug in for like 10, 12 hours a day and work. I'd say what it has helped me a lot is back in home base LA, like I'm all heads down, headphones in, work 12, 14 hours a day. And there's very little balance, at least in like the early stages of the startup. And so where some people find balance of saying, maybe I'll work 6 to 8 hours and like go out for dinner or socialize more on the weekend. I'm very all or nothing. And so I work 60, 80-hour weeks routinely. But my way of finding balance is actually just picking myself up and moving into an entirely different location and culture. And when I do free up a bit more time in these different environments and experiences, that's like my way of finding balance without really sacrificing. Like I'm going to work less because my workload here is the same amount that it is back in LA. It's just when I do find times on like a Saturday or Sunday, I'm out hiking or like seeing the countryside or just experiencing different cultures.
That's really cool. I think that that's something that I could probably learn from too. I try to do similar things. I think I'm so routine that I get thrown off a little bit when I travel, because I love to travel. But I feel like sometimes when I'm in a new city, like when I was in Medellin, I was just so excited to get back to like the routine of my gym and the same lunch I eat every day.
Yeah. Funny you say that. I was just about to say, my friends make fun of me because I'm the most routine oriented person, which I don't necessarily want to be forever, but like for a time and a place right now, I need to optimize my life around getting up at 5:30, going to the gym and being back at my desk and being able to work from like 8 to 10 o'clock, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And like that requires a lot of discipline and a lot of routines. Like I do eat the same thing for lunch and for dinner and for breakfast Monday through Friday, just because like I don't want the time to think about what materials or ingredients I need to buy at the store, like how to cook up different meals. And so it is funny because me being able to travel to different countries is totally different from like the routine based person that I am. But I'd say like I don't do like 4 or 5 days here and then travel to a different location. I have to be there for like 2 to 3 weeks where I can establish like more of a normal routine.
Yeah, that's really cool. Because I'm the exact way. I think the less things you have to think about, the better. As far as you only have so much brain energy. Cool. Well, I want to jump into your background, I mean, you have so much, you have such a vast amount, I'm sure, of stories that you can fill us in on. I want to start with Morning Brew. This podcast is really focused about how are these passionate brand communities built. Morning Brew is one where I immediately think like, wow, people love Morning Brew. You have a passionate community around it. I wanted to ask you, was there anything from the early days of Morning Brew that you guys did to kind of cultivate that sense of passionate community?
Yeah, I'd say like that's the reason I ended up joining Morning Brew as well. The full backstory is after kind of shutting down the company that I alluded to in the intro after college and realizing that it wasn't going to be like a sustainable business to build with my friends. I graduated from University of Maryland, was back living at home in like my parents' basement, never had an internship because I forewent having an internship in pursuit of pursuing this startup and growing that, thinking everyone else in college was going to the career fair and dressing up in like a tux or like a suit and like trying to impress with like resumes and whatever. And I always thought they were so dumb because I was like, oh, I'm working on my startup. It's going to be amazing. And then when the startup didn't work out, I was like totally screwed with like $4 in my bank account and no internship experience. And so was back in my parents' basement in Maryland, applying to like typical consulting jobs, and Austin Reef, who's the co-founder and current CEO of Morning Brew, reached out. He's like a friend from Baltimore as well. And he was like really hyped up about Barstool and how they were making so much money from merch. And he's like, we have this like super passionate group of readers, and like Barstool is a media company, but they sell so much merch. And like, that's where all of their revenue is coming from, apparently at that time. I don't know if that's true, but that was like his thesis. And he's like, we need to do something with merch. And it was like right around that time in 2016 where Shopify was taking off. And I love Shopify. I like thought it was so powerful to spin up, like just take a analog or like IRL business and be able to spin up a storefront without code in like 2 to 3 hours. But a lot of people didn't have the skills to do that. So while I was at home that summer, kind of just doing and tinkering on different things, I was building Shopify sites for my grandfather's shoe store. I did it for Morning Brew, which led Austin to being like, we also have so many other things that we want to build. Like the Skim is taking off. They have this referral program. Axios has like these social share icons at the beginning of every story or at the end of every story. But we don't have an engineer. We have no one to build it, but we have like a laundry list of ideas to build. So in the summer of 2017 is when on contract, I just started building the referral program for Morning Brew, which kind of builds on your question of like, we already had a passionate group of readers that we could tell very tangibly. Most notably from like email newsletters, it's very easy to see like who's engaging and who's not from like the high level metrics of open rate, click-through rate, but also just getting replies from readers who are like, I love your newsletter. I read it every morning. Or I've told my mom, my uncle, my aunt, everyone about Morning Brew because I read it every single morning on my way to work. And so there's a very tangible alignment of what we were creating in terms of content and our audience and how they were resonating with it. And so being on contract and just kind of like poking around in their systems, I would see like the thousands of emails they would get every morning in response to the newsletter. And that's really like what made me, like at the time there were 50,000 subscribers, small 3 guys working out of a closet in New York, like a huge bet to bet on them and like a huge risk. But it was like that tangible kind of like alignment with the audience and feedback that we were receiving is like, if I'm going to make a bet, I think that they could kind of parlay and build on top of that. To answer your question more directly, I think the problem that they were looking to solve was business news is typically pretty boring, dense, dry. It's like Yahoo Finance, CNBC, Wall Street Journal. And they just brought like a very fun conversational tone to that was so different from mainstream business news and media. And it was like that, like your best friend telling you what happened in the business world type vibe that they were giving is really what kind of created that early momentum of this is different. And this is something I kind of want to associate and be a part of.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it stemmed from from the community as far as like what attracted you to it was you saw how much people loved it and you were kind of like, hey, there's got to be something here if there's people this crazy about a newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, if I was on contract just like to get paid building stuff for them and they're like, hey, we have this ad deal, it makes $10,000 a month and we're going to launch this in the future. Like that sounds cool as a business, but without being able to see the hundreds of replies coming in every single morning of people being fanatically obsessed with this newsletter, like that's what made me and like opened my eyes to like, this is a horse that I would bet on, because if they can engage 50,000 people to this extent to be that crazy about an email newsletter, and I understood the dynamics and the economics behind the business, I was like, I think that's just something we could easily compound and build a lot, whether it's education or courses or products or merch or whatever it is. Once you have that fanaticism and fan base that align with your vision, it's the same reason why creators and influencers have such like interesting business models of what they can do and the possibilities. That's like the hard part, is getting people to like you and kind of vibe with you. Once you have that, you can get very creative in how to build businesses on top of that.
Yeah, I think that's what's sometimes challenging too with traditional e-commerce brands. I think that's much more of a product first, audience second mode, or at least it has been. And now you're seeing like Mr. Beast, for example, is like the biggest example of like one of these Shopify stores that's crushing it. But he built an audience and then a product. How does a company that, because a lot of the companies that are listening, they started as a product, built an audience. How does a company that started that way, how do they build like a passionate audience like Morning Brew did, who that's more native to them because that's how they started, as opposed to kind of audience then product, for them, product then audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, but I think there's a lot of companies that have done it. If you want to go like the lowest hanging fruit, and then also just kind of aligning with like newsletters, which I'm obviously very passionate about and think it's an incredible medium to engage an audience. The companies that already have a product have already done the hard part of convincing someone to take out their wallet and purchase something, and they have their customer list of previous purchases. So they have a customer list. I think a lot of e-commerce and product type brands usually view email as solely email marketing, and how can I build like this good looking campaign that I'll send out every Tuesday for 10% off, or we just launched this new product line, and like here's like the 5 new things that we just launched. We have new colors, new variations, new sizes. I think trying to turn that into an audience and building content where you're actually just building and creating content for the value of your end user and customer is something that a lot of people don't think about, because it is a bit more of a long game, right? You're like creating content and putting time and effort and resources into building something that your audience, would like, because they purchase your product. So you already kind of know what they're interested in. You targeted them for a reason. You were able to convert them for a reason. You have a pretty good pulse on like your ICP and who these people are. And if you collect any other data throughout the process, you probably know more than most audience-based like newsletters know in the first place, because you already have their purchase history and everything else. But how do you create content or build a brand or personality where people seek out for like information? A random example, and granted they do it more as like a B2B SaaS player, but like Carta, in terms of like the resources and how much they invest in their blog, you could say like, okay, it's a blog for like SEO purposes, which then converts them to paying B2B SaaS users. But like, I also view them as like a very trusted source in the industry of anytime I have equity questions, anytime one of my employees has questions about stock options, investing and whatever, like I shoot them to the Carta blog, because they've invested in something that creates value. And I think that could be applied across, whether it's a clothing line that's like, I don't know, eco-friendly, and like where you source and like tell the stories of like the people who are helping produce the raw materials. Like there's so many different ways to get creative in telling a story and creating a narrative around your product, with not the sole intention of this is going to drive more sales today, but this is going to make more people align and resonate with our vision, our mission, and our brand, knowing that that will eventually compound into future sales and like better brand awareness.
That's awesome. I think you hit so many things right on the head. I actually worked at HubSpot and Klaviyo before starting Nifty Bridge, and I think I got exposed to a lot of like, I mean, that's like the marketing automation epicenter right there between those two. Obviously now beehiiv coming in, but I would even call you guys sort of this new age different. You guys are very differentiated. I think one of the biggest questions I got asked from customers at Klaviyo was, what else do I send? I have my abandoned cart, I have my post-purchase follow-up, I have my discount or like flash sales or product drops. And I think what's so cool is you're saying, right, there's so much more to email than just those things, like transactional motion. It's building that voice, that identity, and that like just straight value, regardless of if you're trying to sell someone. That really generates sort of these communities, especially with Morning Brew. But I'm also sure that's being done with beehiiv, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, it's very timely because I just created a presentation and finished last night about this exact topic. But using HubSpot as an example, I think their acquisition of the Hustle is like brilliant. And like I've recently resubscribed just to like see the strategies that they're deploying in terms of creating content and driving people down funnel into like HubSpot's core suite of products. It's like very interesting because they removed advertising, right? They don't need advertising. They belong to HubSpot. So it's not diluted by different brands, but it's just providing as much information on business, tech, like wonky stories and like the startup scene. So like they have the ideal ICP down. They know exactly those types of people are probably in a coastal city working at a tech company, or at least like interested in tech. And if they aren't the decision maker to purchase HubSpot, they probably work at an organization that has a CRM where they will need to use either HubSpot or a HubSpot competitor. And they just like work it in where every day they'll have like some sort of like free resource, and the free resource could be to their YouTube channel where they're just creating more like value add content, but also boosting YouTube subscribers and influence like in the video space. Or they say they give you a free resource, which is a lead magnet where you put in your email and some other like buyer information, where they then send you a resource. But it's like lead gen for HubSpot, or like a very direct, like, hey, we have a solution for you. Here's HubSpot CRM. But it's like a very slow drip where like they don't send those emails with the expectation, like we're going to do $100,000 in sales when we press send on this email. But it's like, how do we get people to like and then love the Hustle, to look and view us as a trusted resource, and then also know that the brand behind that is HubSpot, and that HubSpot does like very subtly work in all of the value add that they can provide as an organization and a solution. And you like take that in very subtly, like a piece by piece over the course of like months as you read the Hustle, until eventually someone on your team mentions a CRM and like you immediately think of HubSpot as the first one. And so like I think HubSpot does like an excellent job, and like the Hustle HubSpot combination is like a textbook example. It's different, right? Like it's a very high ticket enterprise SaaS product. And so like if you're selling $40 shirts that are eco-friendly, like a different playbook, but I think it's still applicable, maybe not to the extent, but yeah, I'm like very fascinated with like content as a medium to eventually convert sales on like the long tail.
Yeah, and I think HubSpot, it's good we're talking about them, because I think they just go hand in hand with that. They sort of really pioneered this idea of like inbound marketing, which is now taken on a whole another realm. What's funny is I'm reminded of the highest converting HubSpot trigger when I was there, and still to this day, I'm sure, email signature generator. And I always remember just like how many people would use that thing to generate an email signature, something so simple, but yet so powerful, because it was just getting all these people who uses email signature templates, people that are in a business trying to become more professional, trying to upskill their technology. And so I think there's probably some lessons to learn there of like, what is your brand's email signature generator, right? Like, what is that small little... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wasn't even aware of the email signature generator, but it's so spot on in terms of like the people who would care about that clearly are very career oriented, care about the perception that others think of them, are trying to impress someone, and are probably preparing and like want to look more professional via email so they can climb the career ladder, get introductions, ideally land a better job, eventually be a decision maker for someone like HubSpot. But I think what they all have in common, which is just like the philosophy of like providing value without like the guaranteed expectation that you're going to receive anything in advance, which is like just a great life philosophy in terms of like networking, helping out other people. But like the businesses, you could also say, because they're so large, like they can afford to invest in things like that, knowing that like they don't need to make money right now as a publicly traded company. But I mean, I apply a lot of those to even like beehiiv being as low price as it is. Like we're not discount, but I want to show that our software is better to as many people as possible, knowing that once they see the value in our software and our platform and what we're providing, that there's infinite possibilities in the future to whether it's increase prices, add additional revenue streams, find other ways to monetize. But like being able to lead first with value and then figure out how to convert down funnel once you have more trust, more data, more information on who these people are, I think is like an incredibly powerful mechanism when building a business.
That's so good. I want to, while we're on the topic of beehiiv, because this is something that I was the most excited to talk to you about. I know firsthand marketing automation, which is the realm of beehiiv. I know you guys are a newsletter platform, but it's similar, right? It is the most expensive industry in terms of like how many competitors there are, how much money's being dumped into it. I think marketing automation and sales enablement are like 1 and 2, and I could be wrong on that. But when I think of like the most competitive software industries, I think of like CRM, marketing automation, sales enablement, probably those 3. How does a company like beehiiv come in? Because you guys came in out of nowhere, I feel like, and within maybe a few years, like even we use HubSpot, but I think we also use beehiiv. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very loaded question because there's like a lot of different directions to go there. I'd say we carved out a very specific niche to start. And like, for example, like going to like automations and sales enablement, that isn't our sweet spot yet. We actually just rolled out an automation feature 8 months ago, like a lot later than I would have liked. And it's still being built. I think it's as of like this recording, it's extremely powerful. UI and UX is like, I think one of the best in the industry, but still like a long way to go to compete with like a HubSpot, Klaviyo, Iterable, like customer IO type of like deep integrations with like event-based data, and also like automations and like triggering for like sales and optimizing around that. But I say that because like that isn't the target market we're going after right now. My background was building Morning Brew from 50,000 subscribers to 3.5 million subscribers, and then getting bought by Business Insider. And so in leading the product and engineering there, I built the content management system that the writers used. I built the ad management platform that the sales and copywriters use to like be able to monetize the newsletter. I built the website. I built the referral program. And so my experience is like a content first product via email, like a newsletter, whether it's Morning Brew, Axios, The Skim, The Hustle. Like there's a very specific set of features and data that's important to those people who are creating content-based emails. And that was like my sweet spot of being able to see how we scaled Morning Brew from whatever to over 3 million readers. And so that was like the initial thesis of like looking around in the space. And when you saw all of these other newsletters, Morning Brew included, we were built on MailChimp initially. And then we moved to Campaign Monitor, and then we moved to Sale Through. Just giving a million companies shout outs right now. But anyway, they're all email like enterprise solutions that are built primarily for e-commerce, which is like the larger part of the market, right? And so most of the largest email providers are built around rag and bone sending 20% off discount emails to like e-commerce. And because that's like the optimizations, like sales enablement that most of these email platforms were built on, there was a bunch of media publishers, content creators, newsletter-based companies trying to build a newsletter-based business on software that was built for automation, trigger, sales enablement. And that wasn't the right business model or the suite of tools. And so at Morning Brew, we ended up building and investing in a ton of custom built tools, like from growth, content creation, monetization, entirely bespoke to our business model. And that didn't really exist in the market. The closest comparable is probably Substack, who launched, I think, 3 or 4 years before us, but they are kind of, I think, going after like a very journalism focused market, kind of like a Medium 2.0 is kind of how I view Substack and their business model. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of like the competition. They were the first ones to go after like content-based newsletters and package everything from website, email, and premium subscriptions. And just knowing what I knew from my experience at Morning Brew, it just seemed like such a different suite of products and tools and features and data needed to scale that. And none of the large players were really addressing that head on.
What's really interesting is hearing you say that. I think part of the unintended consequences of solving that problem, which was there was no solution for folks that wanted to sort of lead with the content and the value as opposed to the transactional, is innately you attracted all of these people too that were just fed up with sort of the transactional motion of email, because it's probably less open rates, more spam complaints, right? Like that's kind of where that avenue goes. So it was interesting how you guys made a bet. There was a gap in the market. You guys made a bet on that gap, but you ended up creating almost a new motion for a lot of brands, ours included, which is now more focusing on how can I bring value through a newsletter, not just a newsletter, right? But there's a lot of ways you can do it. But I feel like that's almost like a motion that you guys are sort of championing and pioneering, which also probably helped you guys scale as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna blank on the exact term. I don't know if innovator's dilemma is like the main one, but while all of these massive companies like Mailchimp doing $2-3 billion in revenue a year are focused on SMB and e-commerce, like why would they shift strategy to focus on like email newsletters, which admittedly is such a smaller market? And so it presented an opportunity for us to ride the success of Morning Brew and our experience there to say, if you are a content-based newsletter, or if content is any part of your email strategy, we can serve you better than any of the large players at a fractional cost. And so that's a very compelling, because we're speaking directly to that niche of the market. And then like the goal is like, my philosophy is like email is email, which is email. And like we can always expand into the larger TAM in the future. But when you try to be everything to everyone too soon, I think that ends up backfiring. So right now, laser focused on email as a channel, content as like the main focus of these newsletters. And then when we like with the launch of automations and other features, like can we eventually get there and do more conversion tracking and volume of sales and more event-based sales driven emails? And the answer is probably yes. But that's like a future thing that we kind of need to earn the right to play in that arena after we kind of scale up our initial solution here.
What's one way that you helped? So when you're thinking about beehiiv or morning brew, either example, there's people listening to this that are seeing a massive growth of morning brew, and I know beehiiv is scaled immensely. Do you have any pieces of advice on brands that have a newsletter, or let's just say an email list, on how they can grow that their presence or grow that list?
Yeah, I feel like that's like the $1 million question that everyone kind of wants. Like, how do I grow faster or like have that same like hockey stick growth that Morning Brew has? Like the not sexy answer I always give to start is one, just like the content has to be good. I think far too many people look for like the shortcuts or like silver bullet of, if we can get these subscribers at 50 cents and like scale that and like put on this referral program and then use this recommendation feature, we'll be at 10,000 in 2 months. But if the content sucks, if it's not actually solving a pain point or providing value to your readers, then they end up churning, and then it just becomes like filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom, and it's just like not a sustainable model. And so that's why what jumped out to me at Morning Brew was like we are offering a solution and providing value to a large group of people who clearly resonated with it and loved it. And that was like the hook more than like the growth strategy or like the long-term monetization plans of the business. It was like starting with like things that actually provide value. And so first step is like just aligning on your content direction, making sure that people actually resonate. I think far too many people who run a newsletter are scared to just ask for feedback, whether it's like quantitative surveys or just reply to this email with what we could be doing better, and then actually listening to customer feedback. It's something in SaaS that like I hone in on a lot, is just constantly getting feedback from users and wanting to hear everything we do terribly so we can improve it. But I feel like for content people, whether they don't want to receive content feedback based on like their writing style or whatever, or like they just don't think to do it, they should view the content and the newsletter as a product itself and always be figuring out ways to make it better.
I feel like even for me, I'm listening, I'm trying to like mentally take notes, because we just started our newsletter, and I think the biggest thing too that I've realized is quantity is sometimes something that I think about all the time, is like, hey, how do we grow it faster in terms of numbers? And we had an influencer on here, and I think she kind of opened my eyes to this idea, which I totally agree with, in that like you can have a newsletter of 10,000 people and it can be 20 times more valuable than someone's newsletter of 100,000, depending on how active, engaged, and how tight that newsletter or offering or that community that you've built is. And that's something that I think is so important to realize as well when you're building a newsletter. Exactly what you're saying is like, do we have a sense of like what we want? Like, how do we formulate people that are actually passionate about what we're doing, than just like kind of maybe you're using like a growth button of spending money to get something out there, but then you're attracting people that are just going to churn anyway. So that's also something I'm really trying to think about, is how do we not just attract people, but how do we attract people that are, similar to our mission and can actually help us really expand what we want to do?
Yeah, and I think, and we're probably partially to blame, a lot of what's glorified in like the newsletter space is like the Milk Road story of from zero to acquisition in 10 months. They had over 250,000 subscribers in 10 months, like hyper like growth from the beginning, and had a big exit. But we also like have been recently poking around and finding people who have like 10,000 subscribers that are making $80,000-$90,000 themselves as like an individual side project from a very small user base. And whether they're parlaying ads with community, with other types of like upsells, and it's like a very niche product and very niche content vertical. It's just like interesting that you don't need to have the largest audience or optimize for like 1,000 new subscribers per week or per month to have like a big exit. If you're doing it as a business and this is like just to drive awareness, brand loyalty, and eventually convert down funnel, then like hyper growth isn't always the thing that you need the most. It's actually providing value and increasing the perception of your brand and awareness of your products that they could eventually convert to. If you're an individual and it's a side project, like you don't need a ton of money as a side project or a massive audience. But I know individuals making upwards of $100,000, $200,000 a year as with a newsletter as a side project. So yeah, I mean, it comes in all different shapes and sizes. And I think that the ad-based hyperscale model is what's known to be the most popular, but definitely not always the easiest or the most efficient.
We're coming up on time. I want to ask you, and you might have answered this already. So if you have already kind of given your input on this idea, we can move on to another question, but I want to hit some rapid fires here at the end. What do you think the number one mistake brands make when they're creating a newsletter, when they decide to create a newsletter? What's the biggest mistake they make?
Yeah, I'd probably say what we talked about a bit earlier, which is always optimizing around like the sale right now. Like if you're sending e-commerce, email marketing based newsletters, 20% off, like you want to convert, you want that spike in traffic and sales. But if you're doing it as like a different initiative and newsletter content focused, you don't need to be like kind of scummy and like constantly work in sales into the copy.
And then for brands that are like hearing this podcast and they're like, I want to transition from transactional to value led, what's like one easy, simple step they can do today to just start kind of positioning in that way?
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is it's not like either or, like you can do both. And I think most companies do. Like you shouldn't give up email marketing. I think newsletters and content as a strategy is an additional channel and an additional medium to engage with your audience. But you already have the hard part of having a customer list and people who have paid you. Upload that contact list, ideally to beehiiv. And just the hardest part is really just coming up with the content direction. Like what would provide value that is on brand, raises the awareness and perception of your brand, that would provide value. And yeah, so I think it's just really determining what that content, the hardest part is coming up with the decision of what to write about and what the content angle should be. But you already have actually what most publishers don't have starting off, which is a customer list. So yeah, it's just experimentation.
Amazing. And if anybody's listening, they want to start using beehiiv, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so hopefully by the time you listen to this, we'll have a 30-day free trial. Right now it's 14 days free trial, but no credit card needed. You can sign up beehiiv.com, spelled incorrectly. So beehiiv.com. You get all the premium features for 30 days, no credit card. And yeah, you can contact me anytime on Twitter if you'd like to reach out with any questions or feedback.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I have like a million questions on top of this that I want to get to. We don't have enough time. So maybe next year we'll hop back on here. Would love to also see if you end up sticking around Medellin, we'll have to see and kind of the next steps for beehiiv. But really appreciate you jumping on and excited to see where you take beehiiv next.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.